Hi everyone, my name is Sarah and welcome back to Everyday Consent. Today we have another wonderful consent chat with my very good friend Ellie. Go ahead and introduce yourself, Ellie.
Hi, I'm Ellie. I identify as pansexual. I use the gender pronoun she. And I do want to say in advance as a trigger warning to anyone who's viewing this that I am going to be talking about subjects related to sexual assault for a bit of this, so if that's not content that you're comfortable with, then I please recommend watching her other videos instead right now.
What sort of messages about consent do you think you got when you were growing up, either explicitly or implicitly?
I would say that we could have talked more about consent when I was growing up. That I didn't get a ton of messages about it. I did get the message that there were situations where if you don't provide consent and something happens, that is bad and it is not your fault. So I knew that. But unfortunately, I think this was a sort of odd aspect of my upbringing. I was very happy that I was taught about sex at a very early age. I was taught about it in a very positive way. That it was a natural and healthy part of how people can interact with each other. And very informed way too. Like all the details, labeling the diagrams, stuff like that. It started when I was very young. Like I don't have clear memories of all of it, and continued constantly throughout growing up, with more and more details as I, hit puberty and more facts became relevant. But throughout all those conversations, which were mostly with my mother, she tended to have a tone, and I think this is part of just her own philosophy about her sex life, which I guess most people don't know that about their mothers too much, but she tends to feel like she is a sexual being all the time because she is identified as that sometimes. And so I think I was basically taught growing up that sex is a thing I should want. Much in a way that like a lot of, I think that's more associated with guys than it is with women, I guess, a lot of the time, but that you're brought up to believe like I'm supposed to want sex. That's a thing I should be driven toward. And so I grew up with that, which meant that when sex opportunities of any kind, or even making out, came up, I had this sense of obligation toward them. That I need to say yes right now because this is an opportunity I should have been waiting for the past, however long. I should be excited about this, and therefore I will be excited about it. Which meant that my relationship with consent was complicated for a while because I was often agreeing to things because I felt like I should agree to them. Not just even because my partner had asked, but because it was what society expected me to do, and even not society, it was what my mother expected me to do, like, hey, you got an opportunity to hook up, how'd it go? Very interesting relationship with my mother, and so I think that was a difficult part of not learning about consent growing up, was that I didn't really have a sense of where the decision happened, and that there were going to be decisions that were sometimes going to be difficult to make. I think it was difficult for me to identify when I really wanted things to happen and when it was just the right thing to do. The right thing, yeah. Not really like a good thing. The thing to do. That's a good way of articulating it, yeah.
Can you think of any times that you've had trouble with consent that you would like to share?
Yes, and I can think of a number of times. I think I've gotten to learn a lot through the process, but I've had the misfortune of actually having been sexually assaulted multiple times in my life. And so in each of those situations with people that I knew already, which is really difficult to navigate that, but of course that's the case for most people who deal with those situations. And so as a result, my relationship with consent has been kind of complicated by all of those interactions. And I think the starting point for that was that when I started becoming sexually active, I was coming from this place where I felt like I was obliged to like sexual interaction, that my yes was implicit at all times. So one of my first sexual partners was, for some reason, into the idea of starting sexual interactions while I was asleep. And I was not into it exactly, but I was not sufficiently not into it to stop it, or to say anything at all, in fact. I was also, he was actually like the first partner I had done anything sexual with below the belt. And so that meant that I had no idea what the norms were around that. He was the only person who had initiated those interactions with me before, and so maybe this was a thing that people did once they became sexually active. And so if he started a sexual interaction while I was asleep and I started waking up, I was like, okay, this is fun. And most of the time I was okay with it. Like when I felt more awake, I was like, yeah, that was something I enjoyed. And there were a couple times when it wasn't. And that was a little bit more difficult. But then on top of that, as I was figuring out that I was interested in the BDSM community, the same partner was apparently already interested in it as well. And we talked to each other briefly as he had done something that was kind of slightly dominant, and I reacted positively to it, not verbally, but just like clearly was enthusiastic about it. He was like, "You're into that?" And I was like, "Yes." And that started off a series of other much more intense things that I had not agreed to, was not expecting, and didn't say no to, because it can be really difficult when that catches you off guard, but ended up, I mean, I woke up the following day in pretty bad shape, both physically and emotionally. It was clear to me like something bad has happened. It was a really good time to have my mother there, actually, as a person that I could talk to about this stuff, because I called her the following day. I was like, hey, I think something bad just happened. I couldn't really name it at the time. It took me a few days to kind of get the words on it, and my mother was very respectful of that. She did not try to apply the label of sexual assault or anything else onto it. She basically was just like, okay, how are you doing? What's your plan right now? What would you like to do? What's going to make you feel better? So I broke up with the guy that I was dating that day. Said, you know, that didn't make me feel good. I didn't feel safe, so I'd rather not have physical interactions with you again. And over the course of the following week, kind of finally realized, like, oh, that was really bad. That was really bad.
Yeah.
And so I ended up, I'm really glad that started off a series of decisions that I made to not find partners who weren't going to communicate with me. It was not the end of that journey, because I did end up with multiple partners who still did not communicate with me about things that they were going to do, but it was never that specific problem again.
Okay.
I don't know if that person realizes that was a mistake. I think it's perfectly possible that that's a thing that many people do early in their sex lives, is that they try to anticipate the other person's needs, because that makes them a good sexual partner. And so, in all honesty, it's quite possible that there are enough partners for that person that was what most of them wanted, and that would have been fine without that conversation. But for me, it was a really important starting point, as there is a problem when you don't talk about things, and you often have to talk a lot. Okay, so that's already a pretty long answer, but... okay.
Well, that's a very interesting point, is that you mentioned that the partner that you had may or may not, that his intentions may have been just to anticipate your needs or to make you happy, and we can't know one way or the other about that, but it is possible that coming from a place of trying to anticipate your partner's needs without communicating and without making clear that consent is there can lead to very, very bad consequences. And so I don't know. This is why we're talking about it, right? Yeah. Is that not everybody is evil, but you can still cause harm. So.
Yeah, and I mean I've made that mistake before too, and I much less extreme, because I think it was at a point where I was very sensitive to, like, if someone hadn't given me consent, then that was a problem. But I know at one point I slipped in my usual and you've probably picked up at this point, I'm very strict and structured about how consent works in my life. But I'd been with a partner for a while, and was like, hey, spontaneity, great stuff. I at this point don't really put much weight on spontaneity in sex, because it's just such a dangerous thing to approach, that I just, for the most part, leave it out right now, at least in kind of its more traditional forms. But I tried to, I think I wanted to go down on somebody. It was a moment there was some sexual tension there, and without asking I started to, and it turned out that it wasn't a thing that they were comfortable with at the time. They weren't bothered exactly. They didn't seem upset, but they were like, okay, stop. And I realized that I had not asked first, and kind of flipped out. And it was a reminder, because things had been going okay for a while, that, like, I could get complacent, and I needed to not do that. That you always have to have a conversation in advance, because even if you have the best of intentions, you can't assume anything. Things that were okay one day may not be okay the next. Things that are okay a minute ago may not feel good anymore.
Well, thank you so much for being with us here today, Ellie. It was really fascinating. If you have any questions, follow-up questions for Ellie, you can put them down in the comments or email them to me, and I'll check in with Ellie to see if she wants to respond to them. Thank you so much. If you liked this format, like the video. If you want to see more of these, let me know in the comments. If you just want to see more videos from me, go ahead and subscribe. And happy consenting, folks, and I'll see you next week.
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
We got this.
Yeah.